You've heard the phrase daylight robbery, right? We use it all the time to describe something that's a total ripoff. But what if I told you that phrase comes from a literal tax on daylight, a tax on the sun itself? The year is 1696. King William III of England needs money, a lot of it. And like governments everywhere, he decides the rich should pay. But there's a huge problem. This is the 17th century. There's no IRS, no income tax, no tax returns. The government has absolutely no idea how much money you make. So, how do you tax wealth you can't see? You find a proxy, something you can see from the street, something that can't be hidden, and something that tells you if a person is rich or poor. And they found the perfect one: windows. Rich people lived in big houses. Big houses had lots of windows. Poor people lived in small cottages with just a few. So they invented the window tax. The rule was simple. If your house had up to 10 windows, you paid a small flat fee. Between 10 and 20, a higher fee. And if you had over 20 windows, you paid a heavy tax. It seemed like a stroke of genius. A progressive tax that was super easy to enforce. The tax collector didn't even have to come inside. He just stood on the street and counted your windows. But the government made one critical miscalculation. They completely underestimated the British people's hatred of paying taxes. So instead of paying up, the people of Britain made a choice. They decided to live in the dark. This is the story of the window tax paradox. It is the story of how a simple tax policy physically reshaped the architecture of a nation and accidentally caused a public health crisis that killed thousands. So, how does a tax on windows change the shape of a building? It creates a massive distortion because it taxes a specific design feature, not the actual value of the property. Imagine you're a landlord in London. You own a tenement building where 20 poor families live. The building has 30 windows. Suddenly, you get a tax bill that wipes out your entire profit. What do? You don't sell the building. You don't raise the rent on people who can't afford it. You call a bricklayer and you tell him brick them up all across England, Scotland, and Wales. The sound of trowels and mortar filled the air as people sealed their windows shut. They did whatever it took to get their window count down below the tax threshold. If you walk around London or Edinburgh today, especially in the old historic districts, look closely at the beautiful Georgian buildings. You'll see them everywhere. Blind windows, places where a window should be, but instead there's just a flat, blank wall of brick. Sometimes they even painted fake windows on the bricks just to keep the building's symmetry. That is the physical scar left by the window tax. It's architecture, traumatized by policy. For the rich, this was mostly an annoyance. Maybe they bricked up a window in a servant's room or a pantry. But for the poor, it was deadly. Poor people were packed into crowded tenement buildings. When the landlords bricked up the windows to avoid the tax, they cut off the two things that keep a building healthy: sunlight and fresh air. The rooms became dark, damp, and stagnant. It was the perfect breeding ground for disease. Typhus, cholera, and smallpox. These diseases thrived in the dark, airless rooms. The lack of sunlight also led to a massive increase in rickets, a disease caused by vitamin D deficiency that softens and deforms bones. Rickets became so common in the country that on the European continent it was known as the English disease. The medical community was screaming at the government. In 1845, one doctor testified in Parliament saying, "The window tax is a direct tax on health. It is a tax on light and air." They had inadvertently taxed the very things human beings need to survive. They had effectively taxed the immune system of the poor. The design of the tax made things even worse. It wasn't a smooth, gradual increase. It had notches, or what we now call tax cliffs. For example, a house with 9 windows paid a very small tax, but a house with 10 windows paid a huge amount more. It wasn't a small jump. It was a cliff. This led to all sorts of absurd behavior. People would deliberately build houses with exactly 9 windows. If they needed more light, they'd get creative. They might knock down the wall between 2 windows to create one giant super window. and then argue with the tax collector that technically it was just one window. This sparked endless legal battles over the very definition of a window. Is a small grate a window? Is a hole in the roof a window? This legal chaos completely stifled architectural innovation. Glass production technology was improving, making bigger, clearer panes possible. But who was going to buy more glass when the government was actively punishing you for using it? The glass industry basically stagnated for 150 years. Nowhere was the situation worse than in Edinburgh, Scotland. Edinburgh is a city of tall, narrow tenement buildings called lands, because the tax often applied to the entire building, not each individual apartment. These massive hives of humanity were taxed as if they were single-family mansions. Landlords responded in the most brutal way possible. Entire floors were left completely windowless. There are horrifying accounts from the time of families living on the second or third floor in rooms with literally zero windows. They lived their lives in total darkness just to save a few shillings on a tax bill. Edinburgh's famous nickname, Auld Reekie, or Old Smoky, wasn't just about the coal smoke hanging over the city. It was about the stagnant, disease-ridden air trapped inside these bricked-up residential coffins. This tax, this daylight robbery, lasted for 155 years. It was finally repealed in 1851, and what's fascinating is that it wasn't repealed for economic reasons. It was repealed for public health. The Victorian era saw the rise of the sanitation movement. People were beginning to understand germ theory, or at least the idea that bad air caused disease. The window tax, once seen as a clever fiscal tool, was now viewed as a moral abomination. It was a government policy that was literally killing its own citizens. And the moment it was repealed, it was like a dam breaking. Architects immediately started designing buildings to let the light flood in. Just look at the Crystal Palace, built in 1851. A masterpiece of glass and iron. Look at the huge bay windows that define Victorian homes. It was a national celebration of light. The British population, after a century and a half, finally came out of the dark. So you might be thinking, that's a crazy story, but it was a long time ago. We wouldn't do something that dumb today, right? Well, do we still have window taxes? In a way, yes. Think about property taxes that punish you for home improvements. You add a new room, you renovate your kitchen, you make your home a better place to live. And what happens? Your property assessment goes up and your tax bill goes up. The government punishes you for improving your own property. This encouraged people to let their homes fall into disrepair or to do renovations illegally without permits or consider solar panels. We all say we want green energy. We want people to capture the power of the sun. But in many places, when you install solar panels on your roof, the assessed value of your home increases, which raises your property taxes. We are literally taxing people for collecting sunlight. It's the exact same logic as 1696. You have something nice, something valuable, therefore you must pay more. The window tax paradox teaches us a powerful lesson. Taxes alter design. You can't tax a physical feature of our world without fundamentally changing its shape. If you tax windows, you get walls. If you tax total floor space, you get cramped rooms with low ceilings. If you tax the width of a property, you get long, narrow shotgun houses. Policy is the invisible architect of our lives. It shapes the world around us in ways we rarely notice. And those bricked up windows you can still see in London and Edinburgh. They aren't just a historical curiosity. They are a permanent monument to a government that forgot a simple truth. You can tax money and you can tax land. But you should never, ever tax the sun. Thanks for watching. If you found this interesting, consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories about the hidden forces that shape our world. See you next time.